Well, there's Michael Bierut. Welcome, Michael. We are
Hi,
thrilled
everyone.
to have you. Um, I want to introduce you to our fourth year graphic design students from Professor Durizio's class. Uh, they are eager to meet you, and in the spirit of your interest in calling this Ask Me Anything, they've already done their research about you, Michael. So I don't even have to introduce your long CV. They know who you are and they know a few things about you and they're excited to ask you questions. I simply wanted to start off the conversation since we're talking with folks who are about to enter the job market. Michael, I was talking to one of your professors, our mutual friend, Ann Gory Goodman, and Anne, who revels in the fact that she was your professor once upon a time, said that there was a most excellent story that you told once to her or to someone else that she heard about how you got your job with the Vignellis. So I thought that might be a nice way or a nice question to start with, and then we're going to open up the forum, to all the students here. So thank you for being with us. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Josh, and thank you, professors at RIT and students. Josh, where you guys were all, what are you guys all, when you're looking at me, what are you looking at? Am I on a big screen or am I on a laptop? Where am I? I'm trying to, okay,
You
good. Hi. Okay. I get it now. Thank you. Okay. And if you can't hear me, let me know, but I hope you can. Great question, Josh, and great opening question, particularly with a lot of fourth year students in the room. I ask all of you to either cast your mind back or try to imagine what the world was like in 1974. That was when I was in your position. That was the fall of my final year of design studies under Professor Gory Goodman and her colleagues at the University of Cincinnati College of Design, Architecture, and Art. Later, Design, Architecture, Art, and Planning, but that was later. Um, uh, I was participating, as all my classmates were, in a mandatory work study program that the university is famous for doing in multiple disciplines, including all the design disciplines, architecture, but also engineering and other schools across the campus. All required each student to do 6 months out of every year, we were placed in professional practice situations, more or less given on the job training. And as a result, my bachelor's degree took 5 years to acquire instead of four. We were on quarters, and I would spend every summer and every winter working someplace. Um, One summer, I worked at a real plum job up in Boston at their public television station, WGBH, which was for many years and was then being led, their design department was led by a brilliant guy named Chris Pullman, who I'm sure Josh and Anne and others have met. But he's really a was just a new appointee there running this little design department, and I was an intern in the department, which was fantastic. It was just a summer job, basically, far away from home in Boston. First and last time I ever lived in Boston was back that summer in the 70s. One of the guys I worked with had found out that one of his classmates, I think from Yale, had gotten hired by a firm in New York called Vignelli Associates. And he said, this guy's name was Peter Laundy. He said, oh, Peter got a job at Vignelli, and in fact was appointed. So he was like the senior graphic designer there. And he once one weekend I went to New York and spent a couple extra days there. And I took my physical portfolio with me, which was a big black case with a lot of either schoolwork or printed samples in it, because I wanted the few days I was there maybe to visit some studios. Partly looking for a job, but I was still 9 months away from graduation, so I didn't expect to get a job or any job offers. I secretly just was eager to see what design studios in New York City look like from the inside. So I called around every place that I had contact, and that included Tom's ex-roommate, Peter. And Peter, they were doing some kind of crunch there, and Peter said, "Oh, if you just drop off your portfolio, we'll look at it when we get a chance. Just drop it off on one day and pick it up the next day, 24 hours later." And so, like, I just want to, just so you kind of enjoy the advantages you have graduating in 2025 as opposed to 1980, which is when I ultimately graduated. I think I said 74. I was a rising senior in 79, so I graduated in 80. Forgive me. I was in those days, everything was done with rotary pay phones, like literally put a dime into a slot. The phone would ring, someone would pick it up. Hi, I'm calling for Peter Laundy. And they'd say, let me see if he's there. I'm sorry, he's not here. Would you like to leave a message? That message would be written down on a piece of paper that would be collected by Mr. Laundy when he returned. He would say, do you have, they wouldn't even say, do you have, what's your phone number? Or because you didn't have a cell phone, all you had, the person I was staying with had a phone, but if that phone was called, it would just ring in an empty room. So, you had no recourse but to call back. So, job hunting was like weird then. I will say that if you were kind of like clever and relentless, there were more edges to be had, because it was just so hard to do all this stuff. But I wouldn't trade the toughness of it for the ease and access that you guys will have upon graduation, that you men and women will have upon graduation. So enjoy it. Another thing that I think is puzzling when I think back that many years, 44 years, is I couldn't tell you for sure how I even knew who Massimo Vignelli was. There was no internet, obviously, because no one had personal computers. There was no websites where you could Google anyone's name and look up and see anything about their work. Research meant you would go to a library, look in the physical card catalog, see if there's anything under that name, and then maybe there would be, maybe there wouldn't be. But I sort of like, it must have been just from a couple of books that were lying around school, or maybe on there were some art directors' annuals and some of the places where I had done work placements that I looked at and kind of noted certain names like Vignelli. But it's very strange. It sort of is. Again, people walked around 40 plus years ago. Everyone walked around this state of ignorance, basically. So I will say that the one thing you had going for you was connections, and I think that still is true. So I think I made a calculation then that I would never get a phone picked up by Massimo Vignelli, but maybe I stood a chance with this younger guy, Peter, who was roommates with my boss, Tom. So I decided to kind of come around the back and a little bit underneath, and that was how I made my approach there. Okay, so I some day in the fall of 1979 in New York, I dropped off my portfolio at the Vignelli offices, just in the lobby, gave it to the receptionist, and then she said you could pick it up after lunch tomorrow, and I said sure. And I remember the next day I was with a friend, and we were and I said, we were in the neighbor, and I said, I'm supposed to go pick up my portfolio at Vignelli Associates. And so the two of us went up in the elevator, got off there, and I said, I'm here to pick up my portfolio. And I was like, I was wearing hiking shoes, blue, really beat up and dirty jeans. I had a untucked flannel shirt, longish hair and a beard. And it wasn't like I was trying to project some sort of attitude. I just was dressed like a slob because I wasn't expecting anything to happen outside of picking up this portfolio and lugging it on my way. And so I said to the receptionist, I'm here to pick up my portfolio. She said, what's your name? And I said, it's Michael Bierut. And she leaned in and looked kind of like, attentive, and said, Michael Bierut? And I said, yeah. And he said, could you just wait here? And so I think I didn't even sit down. I just was standing there, like kind of looking at the stuff that was hanging on the wall. And then bounding around the corner comes not Peter Laundy, but Massimo Vignelli himself. And he comes rushing out and he says, "So you're the guy, you're the guy." I could even try to do his accent. You're the kid from Ohio. It's fantastic. I look at your portfolio. I thought it's fantastic. You're not looking for the job now, but maybe you come back later for the job and work out. And sure, but he was like talking so fast, so excitedly, pumping my hand. He says, "I'll show you around." He smacks me on the back. My friend sort of doesn't know what hit her. She's kind of like, "What the, what's going on?" And so the two of us had this whirlwind tour of the office. Peter Laundy was somewhere in the back, and I got to meet him. I got to meet other people there. And before I knew it, I was like back in the in the reception area. And Massimo said, "Now you're still in school, though, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And I said, and he said, you want to still go to school?" And I said, "Yeah." I thought I just had one more year. I may as well finish it up. And he said, "Okay, well, call me in June. We'll we'll work something out." And then, like literally, I think it was maybe that could have taken all literally of 90 seconds, maybe 2 minutes, maybe 2.5 minutes. It was just a blur. And then suddenly, my friend Barbara and I are standing out by the elevator, and she said, "I think he really liked you." And I said, "I never met the guy before. I have no idea what's going on." And so, sure enough, I sent a letter afterwards just thanking him for the visit, kind of had a little correspondence going with him and Peter. I lucked out because a guy who had been working there as a junior designer named Sandro Franchini left, and there was an open position, and they wrote me a letter. And like, again, people like would never make phone calls or send, you couldn't send an email. So I literally got a physical letter in the mail that I think was sent to, I forget where I got at school. Maybe my mom read it to me because it came to my house. But it was like, we were happy to report we'll have a position available in June. If you still are interested in joining us, please contact us so we can make further arrangements. So that was sort of how I got that job. When I got to know Massimo better, and I assume many of you have seen videos of him, and you sort of have a sense of what a joyful, I dare say, excitable character he was. And I think I got him in a good mood. I happened by accident to do sketches very similar to the way he did sketches, like eerily so, without ever having him seen do. Yeah, I'm sure many of you have seen those sketches he did for his book layouts. I did them almost exactly the same way, in pencil, based on a grid, partly because I was getting a proper, what we then called a Swiss style education at the university, because so many of my professors had either gone to Yale or studied at the Kunstgewerbeschule in Basel or whatever. But I sort of like had this like nice, clean sans serif Vignelli / Unimark way of designing that it was the only thing I was taught, so it was what I knew how to do. But I think Massimo saw these sketches and saw some other things, and just it really rung a chord with him. And the similarities to his own work, which others might have found disturbing, he just thought was delightful and further confirmation that I was a good designer. He liked it when people imitated his work, actually. Unlike a lot of other designers, he just thought, if that's the only way to save the world through good design by people imitating my work, I'm all for it. That was sort of the Vignelli philosophy in so many words. And so I ended up, a week after I graduated, I drove to New York and started there in June 1980. I thought I'd work there for maybe 2.5 years until I sort of got the whole thing down and then move on and get another experience. I ended up enjoying working for Massimo and Lella so much that I stayed there for 10 years until October 1990. So when I saw Josh post that this would be open house based on the 80s, thanks to Jennifer, people call me up and ask me. I like, sometimes I'm treated as an expert on Massimo Lella Vignelli, and I am not. Josh maybe and Jennifer and the team at Vignelli Center are much more than I am. And people like Jan Conradi and people who've really made a scholarly work of studying him know much more about Massimo than I do. However, When it comes to the years 1980 to 1990, I was there every day, all day, and on weekends too. So ask me anything about that 10-year period, and I'll try to answer it.
Well, Michael, that was a wonderful introduction and a great story of your own, pragmatism as well as, your foresight. And I think that the story of the tenacity and the way in which you managed getting into or having your work put in front of the Mignellis is a lesson that is aspirational timelessness for students who are out there as well today. So I want to make sure that we privilege these students with the space to ask questions. So who's got the first one?
They can raise their hands. Whoever wants to go first. Who wants to go?
I have one.
Why don't you come up and ask it so we can be sure it gets recorded?
Hi there, Mr. Bierut. Thank you for being with us today. I'm curious about what the studio was like during that time, like what the day-to-day was like, and then how maybe your career progression happened over those years. Thank you.
Great question, and I'll try to answer it briefly. When I started, I was like the most junior of juniors, and Josh and others have heard me reminisce about those days, saying that the lowest rung of a design studio in 1980 was truly low. There were no one had computers, and so everything was done manually, and the most manual of the manual labor was performed by the junior designers, which I was one. So I spent, my first assignments were doing things like, working in the dark room and mixing, thinner into rubber cement and taping up tissues over mechanicals, or just preparing work for other people to do. It was much closer to working in a kitchen than working in a design studio. So I was like, at best, like a prep chef, the person who actually, is given a bunch of celery to cut into cubes and someone else does something with it. So I started there pretty low, but it was always a fairly small operation. Even at its biggest, I think there might have been 35, 40 people. But when I started there, I bet it was 15, 16, 17 people. And so I remember early on, there'd be a moment where, Peter Laundy, who was ostensibly the person I was direct assistant to, would give me some things to do. And I took each one as if it was sort of like the last and most important project I would do in my lifetime. And one of the first ones I did was a price list for Hellerware, what Heller is. Somewhere in the archives is like literally a price list for plastic cups that I pasted up using rubber cement and an X-Acto knife that I did in that summer of 1980. I just slowly worked my way up from there. The thing that was interesting, and I'm not sure how unique it is, but it was definitely the Vignelli way of working, was that when Massimo had a project, he would, at least at the beginning of my experience there, he would meet with the client, get briefed, sort of get a sense of what the assignment was, and then he would come back and usually pick just one person to work on it with him. And if it was an important high billing one, he would pick someone more experienced than I was in those days. If it was like a nonprofit thing or a freebie or some quick one-off thing where he wanted to keep the billing costs low on it, he would come to me. I was getting paid, get this, $13,500 a year. And so I was cheap even by 1980 standards. The good news is that a lot of times those were the most fun jobs. It was like doing a poster or something. It was just doing an invitation for a party. And so being lowly positioned actually had some advantages then. Then as time went on, Massimo realized it might be a little bit faster. Well, I think he realized it was faster if instead of him getting the brief, then coming back and conveying it to the designer, it's faster if the designer's also in the room. So when I started dressing a little bit better and kind of proved that I wasn't embarrassing, I'd get invited into the meeting with the client. So he and I together, and sometimes he and Layla and I together would sort of meet with the client and get the original, information about what a project was. And then sometimes the client would leave and Massimo would just say, stay in the room. And then he would like start sketching something out right on the spot in terms of where he thought the solution might lie. And then he would hand that over to me and take it away. Sometimes he would go off and think about it. Then we'd have another session later. I was very good at interpreting his sketches. For some reason, it didn't seem hard. It was really easy for me to do that. I sort of was always confused when I saw other people had trouble with it. But for me, sort of, I could always tell what his intentions were by looking at one of those sketches. And there's plenty of these sketches, to be looked at in the archives. And if there was like a moment that was a little bit of a breakthrough was there was at least one instance, and I remember exactly what project it was. In fact, there was a project where we got the brief, and then we didn't have time to design it right then and there. So I went away and kind of spent hours, and I said, okay, if I was going to do this, this is how I would do it. And partly I was sort of anticipating what I thought the Vignelli way would be. Partly I was doing something that I thought was personally entertaining and fun. I came back with these sketches all really developed, and Massimo had a couple things that he had started on. I remember he and I and Layla sat down together, and I sort of really, with some embarrassment, said, well, I've been working on some stuff, maybe you want to say I can show it to you and maybe it'll be a start. And so I took out these sketches that were all fairly finished looking. I'd really sweated over them. And I laid them all out. And then Massimo said, when did you do this? This is fantastic. And I said, oh, I had, I don't know. And he started, and I remember he said, well, what if you did this and what if you did that? Then Layla broke in and said, this is like the turning point of my career. Layla said, Massimo, don't you see the kid has done it all already? Let him do it and move on. And so starting from that moment, I sort of my position in the work process shifted dramatically, where Massimo and Layla both really trusted me, and they'd let me go off and do something. By the way, Jennifer, that project is that Santa Cruz fashion stuff, which is somewhere, which you put on Instagram today. Yeah, it's all it's those things, right? And so they look really, this is like they were like trying to be a spree. They did like fashion for teenage girls, and so that's Jansen Italic. I had already done a project with Massimo that had torn paper as an element, so torn paper was safe. And then I sort of like lobbed some like that little piping along the top is the famous Vignelli bar. So everything you see there is like I did all that, and all the sketches were things. Some of those sketches you see may have been sketches that I did that I actually had in the room with me when that thing happened, actually. And so that was the project. I look at it now and it seems kind of embarrassing. And when things like this are posted online, people say, "Oh, I never saw that before," and you can tell they're sort of like, "What the fuck is? What are these goofy, minty colors?" And I don't know. It's just like it's very much of its moment, early '80s. I think the client was on, I don't know. So like, and then I think those things there, oddly enough, everything you're looking at there with the things with the pencils, I think that one of the San Francisco Michaels, like Michael Manwaring or Michael Vanderbyle, did that. I did that photograph in the upper left. I art directed that shoot, but those things with the really vivid colors, I think that was done by one of the locals in San Francisco, following the style that we set up. And then Jennifer, right below that is these are like those, what you see there, those sketches in pencil were ones that I know that I had those in the room when I was there. So there you have it. And so by the way, what I found interesting was that, and I did all those other things too, thinking it could be this or it could be that, but I think we ended up with the torn paper thing. And so what was interesting is I've learned since then at Pentagram, each of my partners has a different way of working. And for instance, my partner, Emily Oberman, she would never do it the way I described. Like my entire career from 1990 to today at Pentagram, as soon as I had a couple of people working for me, every time I get a project, I would pull that designer into the project and they'd sit with me, take the brief, and then as soon as I could, I'd encourage them to sort of like come back to me with their own ideas about how it might proceed. And so I sort of, in a way, I'm just trying over and over and over again to replicate that moment that I had with Massimo and Lella. And I have to admit, I think my success rate has been really satisfying. You know, if you follow Pentagram on Instagram, or go to our website, the story that's up now is this beautiful program for a local theater that Quisquero, who's a designer on my team, did as his last project before he's moving on to take over as design director for his studio in Brooklyn. But he did that all by himself. And it was with one of my oldest clients in the world, a client I've been working with since the late 90s. And so it's really I found it always a really productive and exciting way to work, particularly because it's sort of built in a kind of mentorship. Emily Oberman, my partner, worked for a company called M & Company, and her mentor was a guy named Tibor Coleman. And Tibor's way of working was that they'd get a project and everyone would go into the room and talk about it. And then everyone would come up with ideas for it. Then some of those ideas would be shown to the client, and the client would pick. There'd be one idea that would be the one that the client would agree would be the one they'd go forward with. Whoever had designed that would then own that project going forward. And I've noticed that Emily tends to do it that way. The idea of just picking one person would seem foreign and weird to her. So I think what's interesting is her designers are learning something different. They're learning about collaboration and working on a team and sort of learning directly by doing a process with others, And so I think, it's a slightly different set of values that I can't say I don't exclude those in the practice that I've run at Pentagram, but I think we all have different ways of emphasizing how we work on these things. And it took me a long time before I realized I'm just trying to do what Massimo did for me over and over and over again with the people that have worked for me.
That's a great story about mentorship and process. Thank you, Michael. Who else has a question? Oh,
Right here.
right here.
So it's wonderful to hear that you've kind of continued that cycle of mentorship. So that's, a lovely piece of tradition you've carried with you. I wonder, you said that so many of your sketches represented, kind of looked like his and had a lot of things in common. Was there any time where you were working with him where you really didn't see eye to eye, or any projects in particular that you felt were more difficult because of that?
Can you repeat the very end? I think I know what you said, but I just want to make sure I have it clear.
Were there any projects that you kind of didn't necessarily have the same vision as Massimo? And became a challenge?
Yeah. I mean, sometimes they were very encouraging. And if there was a client, we had a couple of nonprofit clients where they just were, they either had very little money or no money. And Layla, who was always trying to make sure that the office didn't go out of business, would always say, Massimo, you shouldn't be doing this in the office. We can't build them anything. Let Michael do it. Let Michael do it as a freelance client, and I would charge them $10 an hour, $12 an hour, and I was much more affordable, and it was with the consent of the Vignelli. So then also doing just free volunteer work for AIGA and other organizations, and so I remember on two different occasions. Once I was doing an AIGA poster, and just for fun, I set it in Franklin Gothic, and Massimo saw it on my desk and said, "What is that typeface?" And I said, "It's Franklin Gothic." And he said, "Why are you using that?" And I said, I don't know. I just thought, I just thought it'd be, instead of having chicken every day, I thought I'd have a pork chop. I don't know. It was like that, you know. And he just thought it was like, why would anyone in the world use Franklin Gothic in a world where Helvetica is universally available, right? And so I did, you know, I hardly knew what to like. I just didn't, you know. He had his famous five typefaces, a position that I sort of respected, but I sort of like never quite felt that those were the best typefaces. I think Franklin Gothic is a nice typeface. More horrible than that was an instance I wrote about way back when, where I was doing an exhibition, a little exhibition catalog for a show that was pictures from the American, like not like very early history of photography, late 19th century daguerreotypes from the American West. And I decided to make the cover of it be sort of a simulated like late 19th century show bill with like these different kind of display typefaces, all justified, but like, you know, a bunch of different typefaces. And so it looked like an old-fashioned kind of like, you know, come to the wild bill, come to the, it looked like like a poster you'd print to invite people to a rodeo or something, you know. And he just thought, I mean, Massimo thought that was just terrible. Just everything about it was just seemed ghastly to him. You know, it just was pretending to be old when you were actually, you know, living in the late 80s, using a bunch of different weird typefaces that weren't well designed, using too many typefaces, you know, you know, the whole thing was just kind of just, I mean, he just had no tolerance for that at all. And I think for the most part, I respected that position. I do think he made one cataclysmic mistake that bothers me all the time when I see it, and is based on his own convictions about these things, which I think just got the better of him. He got, right as I was leaving in 1990, he got a fantastic commission to do all the signage for Grand Central Terminal, which you know, if you can picture Grand Central in New York, it got refurbished in the 90s, and all the old signage was replaced with new signage. And what was interesting was, and what I liked about what Massimo did was, in the original signs in Grand Central were all simply painted right on the marble, oddly enough. It wasn't like fancy individual letters cut out of metal and mounted. They just were like painted right on the marble. And so he did his signs exactly the same way. However, he did them all in Garamond #3. And I mean, I just think that it's like not a good typeface for signs. It's not designed for that. It doesn't look good. It doesn't look off. It doesn't go with Grand Central and its period. It just looks really weird. And oddly enough, I think Jonathan Heffler and Tobias Fred Jones had just drawn a revival version of the original Grand Central signage typeface, which existed in some places at Grand Central still because it was cast in metal here and there. And so they did a whole alphabet for 212 Associates, who was doing another project, and that would have looked fantastic. But Massimo wouldn't do it because he thought it was like fake history in a way. He thought it was more honest to use something that was a contemporary typeface. Oh, this is Garamond #3 based on some typeface from the 1500s, you know, by, Claude Garamond, based on Bembo's, based on the original drawings for Bembo. You know, it's like ridiculous, you know. And so I don't know, that always bugged me a little bit. So I would have had an argument with him up to a point. But on the other hand, it was sort of like for the most part, I sort of like made my suggestions, and but kind of took some chances, asked for forgiveness instead of permission, and then didn't do it. Never did it on a job for a client who thought they were hiring Vignelli Associates and wanted the Vignelli vision. I was very careful to kind of segregate out my experiments where I would take a chance from the work I was doing 9 to 5, which were much more kind of straight down the middle, Vignelli house style. If you go to Grand Central, look at that Garamond. It's just, I don't know.
Field trip. Other questions here? Right here? Oh, sorry. Whoever is over here is next.
Go ahead. Oh, okay.
We'll start here and you'll get the next one. Go ahead. Yeah, come on up. Talk to the owl.
Okay. Hi, thank you for being here today. My name is Alyssa Fabosi. I was wondering, so I once saw that you gave the advice to stay up late and then later came back and said that was the worst advice that you've given. So I was wondering, looking back at this time period, as a designer who really wanted to get involved and put in those extra hours and learn and experience, do you have any advice to balance life and work?
Yeah, I'm glad that you read the original advice and then saw the video I did where I sort of um said it was the worst advice I ever gave. Um, I think the main thing to remember is that I wanted to be a good designer, and I thought the best way to be a good designer was just to do it all my waking hours and to make it the highest priority in my life. And I think if I can turn it into some wisdom that I finally came to much, much, much later, and I even think too late in many ways, was that a good designer isn't someone who cares about design exclusively. A good designer is someone who cares about life and cares about people and cares about giving joy to people or helping them understand things or, helping them connect with others in the world around us. And in order to do that, if you're a graphic designer, you're going to use typography and images and color and the tools that we have available to us. But all of those are not worth a thing unless you have insights into real life, the way that human beings encounter each other, talk to each other, make friends with each other, fall in love with each other. And you don't learn that by staring at, letter forms. You don't learn that by staying up all night, re-spacing, the type in some headline or, I mean, I like it when people work hard. It's nice to be young and not need that much sleep. But I have whole, I talk about this with my wife all the time. There are whole decades of my life where I sort of think, boy, I wish I hadn't gone on that trip. I wish I would have been there to see my, she'll be reminiscing about something one of our kids did, and they're all grown adults in their 30s who have largely forgiven me for being such an absentee father. But all of them will, she'll talk about some anecdote and I'll like have no memory of it all. And instead you can note the vividness that I can describe each of those things on that table from the 80s, right? So it comes in handy at a moment like this. You're fortunate to have someone who can kind of like give you a tour of graphic design over a certain period, but that was information that crowded out other things in my brain that I think it wouldn't have made me less a designer and would have helped me, kind of maybe bring a richer experience to people. I think slowly but surely over the course of my life, I kind of struck a better balance and came around to kind of like, readjusting my priorities to a certain point. But I think, and I think at the very beginning, it was like, that stay up late essay specifically had to do with the oddity of the fact that I first moved to New York, I lived literally 3 minutes from the office. And I was married to the same woman I'm married to today, but she then had a job down on Wall Street that required her to get up 3 hours earlier than I did every morning. So she'd go to bed 3 hours earlier than I would every night. And then I would have nothing to do in this tiny claustrophobic apartment. So I just would walk, I'd walk 3 blocks south on First Avenue, unlock Vignelli. So just turn on the lights and then, design the hell out of something until about 2 a.m. Then I'd come home and watch some TV. Then I'd go to bed at 3. Then I'd wake up at 9:15. Then I'd brush my teeth, put on some filthy blue jeans and a flannel shirt. And I'd show up at work at around 9:35, and I'd be there way before the Vignellis, who didn't show up till 10 or so. I could do it for the first few years, but I kind of got a little too addicted to it. And I encourage all of you to remember that there is a big world outside. It's even much more accessible to you than it was to any of us in those days. Maybe dangerously accessible, maybe dangerously distracting, but engaging with it and engaging with the people you care about and the people that you love and the people who you know care about you is just as important as anything you're going to do in any of these classes or over the course of your career, in my opinion.
Mystic answer. All right, now I'm not forgetting about you. Come on up.
Hello, my name is Sarah, and I've been wondering if you were ever given like a project that was very big or very different from what you were used to designing, and how you challenge that and or change your strategy to overcome that project.
Yeah, this won't seem that dramatic. If it's on the table, Jennifer, there's a bunch of yellow things for a company called Kroin, Kroin. I don't know if any of those are there, but they were a company that made fittings for imported fancy European fittings for bathrooms and stuff like that. And I was doing a catalog for them that the Vignellis assigned to me. And I realized halfway through that I was in way over my head, that it was like so much work and I couldn't get it done. And I was like afraid to ask for help. The clients sort of panicked and kind of were worried that I wouldn't be able to make the deadline for it. The whole thing was like this all-consuming thing. They were based in Boston. I went up there and I worked with a guy who named John. I think it was John Flansburgh, who was an architect who did all the technical drawings for the catalog. His son now is in the band They Must Be Giants. So that's how that's how I know. That's why I remember that name. But it was. But I remember sort of like being really overwhelmed by that and having probably the two worst weeks in my life. And what's funny is that they came out beautifully. The client was really happy when they came out. I was really relieved when the client was happy the thing was done. And the thing I learned from it was that, and I say this sometimes, I've said this over and over again to my to the people that work for me, is that it's only, it's work, it's graphic design. It seems like the biggest thing in the world while you're doing it, but then if you do something memorable, you'll have that thing to look at. How it came into being fades away a little bit, and the thing itself is the only evidence of what happened. And I got a note from someone who worked for me a long time ago, like I think maybe in the early aughts, like in 2000, 2001. And she said, "I'll never forget how kind you were to me when I came in and I was like crying because," and then she named the client by name, Steve W., let's call him. Steve W. Had these really demanding deadlines and she couldn't meet them, so she was like crying. And I said, "Let's see if I can fix this." And I called Steve on the phone. I said, "Steve, we need a little bit more time for this. This is just like Melissa can't work this fast, and no one could." So just because she's hit all the deadlines before doesn't mean we just keep making them shorter and shorter. So give us some more time. We'll get back to you with the new schedule for this. Okay. So then I hung up, and she described this to me, and then said afterwards, I said, if you want to cry, if you want to cry to your friends, or you want to cry at home, if you want to cry because of family, you want to cry because of real life, you should cry as much as you want. But I said, this is just graphic design. At the end of the day, it's not that important. Try to avoid crying about it. I think if I say there's no crying in graphic design, a la Tom Hanks in A League of Their Own. But that was sort of like I just wanted to, and she remembered that. And what's funny is again, I have no memory of any of this. I couldn't like she named the guy, and I couldn't tell you a thing about this guy, who obviously was looming so large in her life at that moment. This guy with these impossible deadlines. So I've told people, you'll find I have these notebooks that I've kept, and I'll go back to a notebook from 1996 and I'll find all these notes from someone that seemed like the most important thing in the world. And I don't recognize any of the names or remember anything about what it was that was all consuming on that Tuesday from March in 1991 or whatever. So everything sort of, life is made out of these little moments that seem big at the moment, then they become trivial. And the surprise is every once in a while, something becomes consequential and you can't quite predict what that is, right? So even the big thing that you were asking about may not seem big at the moment. The biggest thing that sort of is crushing you may be something you won't be able to even remember having had happened, 10 years later. So you never can tell. You just have to be present for all these moments and present for the other moments as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi, Michael. This is Ishan here. I have a question for you. Do you have any specific typefaces or something that you really like using? So Massimo has Helvetica. Do you have yours, which you love using every time?
There are two that I like only because they sort of contain the design within them in a way. Like they're not neutral, but like if you use them, you can kind of feel they're telling you what to do with them. And you may not know either of them by name. One is called Schmalfetta. I don't know if any of you guys know what Schmalfetta is, right? It's a very condensed sans serif typeface. Let's see. Jennifer, on that table, is there a newsletter with a big M on it by any crazy chance?
Oh, in the back.
Jennifer, Jesus, this is funny. Yeah, there it is. Boom. Okay, open that up. I just want to see something. Oh, can you open it up? Is it under glass or can you open it? Is it mounted? I forgot.
You might not be able to hear.
So you get the idea though. That big M is sort of like what Schmalfetta looks like. It's very condensed. It was very, very popular with a lot of European designers. Yeah, there you go. So those big H's, those big N's, those are all in this typeface called Schmalfetta. And I have to admit, it's just great. It was like this guy named Willi Fleckhaus, who Massimo really liked as a designer. He was a German magazine designer, used it all the time. It's just fantastic. And then the other typeface is called we called it DD, but it's like a Dido, all caps. And if you have anything from IDCNY, it's what IDC is set in. It looks like a Bodoni, except it's much more high contrast. So those two are, and I just used that DD typeface. We had it redrawn and we used it for this whole new thing we did for the 92nd Street Y, because the 9 is so beautiful and the 2 is so beautiful. Yeah, so if you zoom in on those, that's all plain old Bodoni underneath. But the logo itself, if you can find it, that IDC, yeah, so I think that's all DD in that in the jumbled up letter thing.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
so for instance, when Massimo introduced me to the IDCNY client, and I basically did all that stuff by myself. And I did all kinds of stuff that he never, ever would have done. one of those posters, we commissioned a cartoonist from the Village Voice magazine just to go to some events there and to kind of eavesdrop on what people were saying and make a comic strip out of it. And I, like Massimo, that's just not the kind of thing he would ever do at all. And I just thought it would be funny. But as long as it was sort of like Bedoni and red and black, he was sort of okay with it. It's sort of like it was, I just ended up having a lot of leeway in the end while I was there. Jennifer, thanks for running around like that.
You're welcome.
She's getting her steps in today. Next. Switch.
And then
That's good. All right.
You're next. Okay.
Hello. Oh, it splits into two views. All right. Thank you, Michael, for being here. My name is Emmett, and I wanted to ask you about the Architectural League of New York and what it was like to work on that project and have like an ongoing, decades-long relationship, how that started and where it ended up.
I started work, that was like almost one of the first projects I worked on there. And in fact, Josh, this will mean something to you. They had appointed Barbara Lee Diamondstein to organize a gala for them. And so in the summer of 1980, I was doing all the work for that gala. That was a total freebie client for Vignelli. He was on their board, did everything for free. And so Layla quite properly said, just have that kid from Cincinnati do everything. He's cheap. And then later I ended up working, the original director retired and moved on, then was replaced by a woman named Rosalie Ginevro, who was there for 38 years. Who was there for like 33 years or so. And she basically really trusted me and called me to do everything. So I basically was doing all the work for the Architectural League through the 80s. When I left to go to Pentagram in the 90s, I asked Massimo if I could continue working with them, and he said yes. I've worked with them ever since. It took a long time. For a long time, I really resisted having any house style at all for them. They really didn't have a logo, and I just said, why don't we just have every single thing be different for these guys? And so we did all these different things that had very little in common. They sort of really wanted to have a logo, and eventually we did a typographic logo for them that I think Massimo would have approved of. I think Massimo did approve of it, actually. That was just kind of taking their name and kind of arranging it in a little grid. And then over the past 10, 12 years, we started like doing everything in Helvetica in a way, just to kind of, and that was partly what, I hired a bunch of designers who liked Helvetica a lot more than I did, and kind of thought, well, if I'm working for a guy who used to work for Vignelli, I'm just going to get into the Helvetica. So I was never that into it, but even though I was in a movie about it, I still was never that into it. But Hamish Smythe and Jesse Reed and Britt Cobb, these guys were really good at using Helvetica, or as they would say, Neuhaus Grotesque, actually, the recut version of Helvetica that Christian Schwartz did. And so most of the work we've done in the past dozen years or so, we're done like that. And I've treated that project just the same. I've done it very Vignelli style, where I've had a long series of designers who I said, come up with an idea for this and it'll be great. This goes all the way back to the early 90s, where I can find work that that Carrie Powell did, or that Esther Brodowski did, or Jennifer Kynan, or and then Britt Cobb has done most of the work over the last 10 years. If you follow Pentagram online, they have this they have a social event every year called the Beaux-Arts Ball that has a different theme. And so Britt single-handedly, the theme was heat, and I just said, knock yourself out, Britt. This is going to be the last one of these you are going to do. And so he came up with this whole thing where it basically is taking the letters in Helvetica, taking these Neuhaus Grotesque letters and kind of melting them sort of by burning them digitally, sort of. So came up with a great program for it. I think if you look at his account, which is Cobco, or I kind of copied some of them too on mine. You can sort of see on Instagram what he did. But it's been a really great supportive environment. My longtime client there resigned about a year and a half ago, and her replacement's a much younger guy. And I sort of thought, maybe I should pass this on to someone else. It would be Britt Cobb, except he's moved down to North Carolina, and they need someone in New York. So my partner Eddie Opara is going to take it over going forward. I'm sort of doing less hands-on design work these days, and kind of working usually in collaboration, just consulting with my clients. I'm a lot of my my design team has been kind of dismantled, so I can't none of you can work for me because no one works for me at Pentagram anymore. I sort of am just a partner without a design team. I just kind of hook on to other people's projects as they come into and move around in the studio. So
we have probably time for one more question here.
Hi, my name is Karina. I wanted to ask about something you've noticed with the current/younger generation of designers that kind of intrigues you in terms of the evolution of design.
well, for one thing, you guys are really unbelievably talented and aware of what's going on in the world of design, and have this real facility with the tools of design. And that includes, things that would have been way beyond our imagination when I was graduating, like being able to design whole working typefaces, doing, animation, doing, beautiful renderings. These were all things that sort of were just, completely beyond our grasp back then. And I think one of the things that I did during the pandemic at Pentagram was I edited an office newsletter. And in the newsletter, there was a section that was greeting new staff members, many of whom were just interns who would only work for us for 3 months or 6 months, some of whom were junior members joining teams. And when I do little interviews with them and little write-ups of who they were, and I'd always link to their websites, because each one of the designers would generally have a personal website, or at least an Instagram or something. And I was just so, they were so good. And they're good enough to have impressed, one of my partners to get a job at Pentagram. So I'm not sure it's par for the course, but there was just such virtuosity and intelligence in the work that I saw, that's really come to impress me. And I do think it's it may very well be that what I'm describing as inspirational can be daunting for you guys, can be intimidating for you guys, knowing that you're competing with people, your classmates are talented, other graduates coming from all over the world to wherever you're looking for a job may be talented. So I think there's the level of design has kind of gone up everywhere, if you ask me. And also your ability to get your own work out there into the world, thanks to social media, is also a new thing as well. It would take forever for work to become visible, when I was starting out. And now I've had people, there are people that have worked at Pentagram who started, who just really were active on Instagram, posted a lot of not just work they had done for us, but, sketches and, private projects they were working on, where by the time they left Pentagram, they had a really strong reputation, sufficient that they could open their own studio or have their pick of jobs. So I think these are all really, really great things. And I'm very optimistic about, where design is going.
Well, Michael, I think that's a terrific place for us to segue out of this great conversation. Thank you for your generous time today. But most of all, thank you for your optimism. We look to you as a beacon in the world of good design, and to know that you're optimistic about the future of design helps us greatly to proceed. I think I speak for all these students who are about to enter the real world soon. But we really want to thank you for your time and thank you so much to Jennifer for masterminding this opportunity to poke at the 1980s and for wearing your sneakers so that you can keep.
And so this last, thank you very much, Josh. This last thing is for Jennifer. On your Instagram feed, I was looking at the projects you have up there, and a couple of people asked questions about them. There's the compact identity. I did that. And I gave myself credit for doing it in green, which was not a big color back then. But unless I'm wrong, I don't think that was ever produced. I think that was a comp that never got used by them. I might be crazy. See if those things look real. If they were used, they weren't used for a long time. Then
They're not real.
and then you got a little bit of a killing joke up there. Go for it. Yeah, there you go. It looks real. Is it real or is that a piece of foam core?
It's a piece of.
That looks like foam core to me. And then I don't know, that looks real. I don't know. And then Santa Cruz we talked about already. Nation's Business was not one of my they were nice client, but sort of like not, those things are not that great. We were doing the work and they were executing it, and those covers especially are not so great. The Artemides stuff you show is just a little past my time. I think that was back to Massimo. And then finally in the other room, that Fratelli Rossetti stuff, that was all me. I did that all by myself. Every one of those sketches, the redrawing of the logo, I did that all by myself. It was really fun. That NEC logo was the one they had when they came to us. So, and Massimo thought it was fantastic. He just thought it was so weird looking. He didn't want to change a thing. I think we just tightened it up a little bit. So thank you. Well, enjoy the 80s, guys. It was a great time to be alive, if you can remember it.
Take good care and come visit us soon.
I will. Thank you.
Thank you.